I never thought a parking notice could threaten my home. She waved her clipboard like it was the Constitution until the bylaw I dug up turned it into her trap. One line about reasonable accommodation. One ledger tied to her own mailbox, and suddenly the HOA queen wasn't untouchable. And that wasn't even the worst part. I thought the Arizona sun was hot enough until I saw the red stamped notice under my wiper blade. The paper stuck there like a challenge, edges curled from the heat, the ink bleeding a little under the glare. My first reaction was confusion, then irritation, and finally that tightening in the gut that told me this wasn't just a one-off annoyance. This was the start of something. I slipped the notice from under the wiper, folding it once to keep the sun from bleaching it further. The words leapt out. Notice of proposed rule, effective immediately. It banned overnight parking in the community lot where most of us had left our cars for years when the driveways got too cramped or our guests came over. I held the letter up against the shimmer of heat rising from the cracked asphalt and thought of Sarah's appointments, the ones she needed the extra space for. My throat went dry. I had taken a photograph of the letter earlier that morning when I saw one fluttering on another neighbor's windshield. Something about the official stamp and the phrasing made me uneasy. That photograph I didn't know then would become Exhibit A in the showdown yet to come. For now, though, it was just me, the punishing heat, and a piece of paper that threatened to upend our routines. Karen was leaning against her SUV, a few spaces down, clipboard pressed to her chest like a badge of honor. She was talking to Mr. Jenkins from down the block, gesturing with the kind of authority you only saw in someone who thrived on neighborhood power. "It's about protecting property values," she announced, voice cutting through the heat waves. "People leaving old sedans and trucks overnight, it looks bad. We can't have that." Mr. Jenkins nodded along politely, though I could see the weariness in his eyes. He had lived through 3 HOA boards and probably knew better than to argue. Others walked past, giving small nods of acknowledgement but saying nothing. The silence felt heavier than the heat. Sarah slid her hand through the crook of my elbow. She had been walking slower these days, the therapy trips leaving her more tired than she wanted to admit. "This is going to make it harder," she murmured, voice just for me. "The closer parking spots are already taken by people who don't even need them. If we can't use the lot—" She let the sentence trail off, but I knew the rest. I folded the notice tighter and tucked it into my pocket. "Let's see if this holds up," I muttered more to myself than anyone else. Karen, sharp as a hawk, must have caught it because she straightened and strode toward us, the clipboard now a weapon. "Rules are rules," she declared, blocking our path. "No exceptions. That's the foundation of a community, everyone complying." I felt my jaw tighten. Even if those rules don't make sense. Karen smiled, that thin kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Especially then. Consistency is everything. I could feel the heat rising not just from the pavement but from my own frustration. The shimmer around us seemed to bend and twist, carrying the weight of unspoken words. A few bystanders shifted, but still no one spoke up. We moved past her, Sarah gripping my arm a little tighter. As we reached the car, I caught snatches of conversation from the retirees sitting with their thermos mugs near the town hall steps. "Labor Day, BBQ's coming up," one said, fanning himself with a folded newspaper. "Wonder if the board will even let us park for that." A chuckle, half amusement, half resignation, floated in the air. Back home, the day wore on, the heat pressing against the walls, the red notice burning a hole in my pocket. I tried to distract myself with small chores, but every time I passed the kitchen counter, my eyes fell on the folded paper. Sarah moved quietly around the house, putting dishes away, watering the plant by the window, her movements deliberate, conserving energy. Neither of us spoke much. By evening, the desert cooled just enough to make the porch bearable. I sat there a while listening to the cicadas, the memory of Karen's voice still echoing. No exceptions. The words had a finality to them, as if she believed they ended all discussion. But I wasn't so sure. That night, I opened the bylaws at our kitchen table and found one line about reasonable accommodation under federal law. By Friday evening, the potluck tables were loaded with casseroles, but Karen circled the lot like a deputy without a badge. The air was softer than it had been all week, a purple wash settling over Simmons Valley as the desert sky turned from peach to violet. Folding tables bowed under the weight of green bean bakes and church lady pies. Lemonade sweated in plastic pitchers, the ice clinking when someone topped off a cup. The church choir had carried their practice outside, humming their harmonies under the eaves, and for a moment the place felt like the small towns I'd known as a kid, paper plates, lawn chairs, neighbors greeting neighbors. Then the SUV rolled past slow, and heads turned the way birds do when a shadow crosses the ground. Karen pulled up near the entrance and stepped out, crisply, clipboard in the crook of her arm. yellow slips fanned like playing cards. She wore the same expression she'd had on Monday, the one that said this wasn't a neighborhood to her, it was an organization to be managed. I watched her pause at the edge of the lot, take in the rows of cars, and set off with quick, economical strides. Sarah squeezed my hand and let go. She looked pale, but determined, a sweater over her shoulders against the evening breeze. I promised Mrs. Chen I'd bring her a plate, she said, and moved toward the table where the women were trading recipes and laughter. The choir started into a hymn that drifted like cottonseed over the heads of everyone in line. I hung back by the cars, the camera on my phone already open. I didn't need to zoom much. Karen wasn't hiding what she was doing. She stopped at a dented minivan with a faded baseball sticker and pressed a slip under the driver's wiper. She moved on to a pickup with a landscaping logo, then a silver sedan whose owner was balancing a bean salad and a plate of deviled eggs. I took note of the time each slip appeared, the license plates where the cars were parked. The pattern I suspected would matter later. Neighbors pretended not to notice. A few men at the grill studied the coals with sudden intensity. A grandmother in a sun hat shifted her purse from one shoulder to the other and turned her back. There was embarrassment in the air and a kind of quiet shame, the way communities feel when someone starts measuring them like a set of drapes. "You, keeping score," a voice said behind me. It was David Santos, his youngest, trailing a ribbon of pink chalk dust along the curb. I nodded. "Just writing down what happens when. You'd think tonight would be safe." He tipped his chin toward the choir. "We even got the altos out." Karen's shoes clicked against the pavement. She moved in a neat grid, north row first, then the middle, then the overflow by the chain-link fence. She didn't run out of paper. When she passed a headlight, she checked her reflection and straightened her collar. By the time she got to the fence line, a white van had pulled in near the end of the row, the memorial van. I'd know it anywhere, even without the small framed photo tied to the visor with a ribbon. Mrs. Chen sat a moment behind the wheel, hands on 10 and 2, gathering herself. Then she turned off the engine and smoothed her skirt and stepped out with dignity. "Evening, Marcus," she said. "I brought the sesame noodles." "Evening, ma'am," I said. "Let me carry that." We walked together to the tables, the noodles warm through the foil. The choir reached a high note and held it, and I could see the pride in her eyes, the way she stood just a little straighter when someone waved her over. Her husband had loved these nights. He used to ladle chili like he was feeding a battalion. When I returned to the cars, Karen was already at the van. She didn't look at Mrs. Chen's picture. She didn't see the small cross dangling from the mirror or the tiny veteran's flag stuck a little crooked into the dash vent. She only saw the size, the length of the bumper beyond the painted line. Her pen hissed across the top slip, and she pressed it under the wiper blade with 2 precise taps. I checked the time and took a photo. The yellow glowed under the lot light. 2 men from the grill drifted toward us, then drifted away again when Karen turned. A boy in a choir robe chased his sister around a row of folding chairs. Their sandals slapped the pavement like metronomes. I took 3 more pictures from different angles. Details I reminded myself. The small things hang a case together. "Evening," Karen said when she noticed me. Her smile was professional. "We're improving compliance. Looks like you're improving your paper quota," I said. "Clarity helps everyone," she said. "We've had too much ambiguity about overnight use. If people get used to rules early, there's less friction later." I thought of Sarah, the way she'd held my arm near the town hall on Monday. "Where are folks supposed to put their cars tonight?" I asked. "There's a potluck. Half the neighborhood is here." "Driveways, side streets," she said. The boards discussed the optics of clutter in community spaces. "Optics," I repeated, writing the word down in my phone. "Good to know." She moved on the clipboard snug against her ribs. I watched her tape a slip to a compact car that belonged to a widower who only drove to the pharmacy and back. Then I watched the widower take the slip, fold it into a perfect square, and tuck it into his pocket as if it were a receipt he didn't dare throw away. The choir finished, and people clapped politely. A girl in a ponytail poured lemonade for anyone who paused near her cooler. Near the fence, 2 teenagers drew wide loops with chalk, a hopscotch grid turning into a winding river, then a sun, then a tree. The powder hung in the air, lit by the floodlight that had flicked on above the lot. Moths banged against the bulb and dropped, recovered, and circled again. Sarah found me with a plate made up for Mrs. Chen. "She's trying not to let it get to her," she said. She thanked me 3 times for the noodles. "And the slip. She's pretending it isn't there yet." Sarah swallowed. "She'll look when she goes home." We ate standing by our bumper. The casserole had ground beef and corn chips and the kind of spice that sneaks up on you. A line formed at the pie table. Someone plugged in a long cord, and a string of cheap lanterns blinked themselves awake. For a minute it looked like any old neighborhood gathering. If you squinted, you could ignore the yellow tags. I couldn't ignore them. I took another series of photos wide, then tight, capturing the cars before and after Karen's pass. I wrote the minute marks in a fresh note: 6, 14, 6, 16, 6, 22. It wasn't that I planned to use them, it was that I knew I might have to. When Karen circled back, she'd traded her stack of slips for a manila envelope. She pulled out copies of the proposed fine schedule and offered them with a courteous nod to anyone who would take one. Most people did as if refusing a handout would draw heat. The paper was bright white and crisp and full of numbers. It listed offenses like a catalog. The top line made a show of reason, initial notice courtesy. Everything that followed cost money. She approached me as though we'd agreed to meet. "I see you're documenting," she said lightly. "That's fine. We're transparent." "Good," I said. "Transparency is healthy." She lifted the envelope and tapped it with her finger so the sheets settled square. "Fine schedule begins next month. Don't test me." Sarah looked down at her lemonade cup. David Santos shifted his weight, then decided to take his daughter for another slice of pie. The floodlight hummed a little louder, and the moths doubled their efforts. Somewhere beyond the tables, a metal chair scraped, then scraped again. "People will have questions," I said. "Some have special circumstances." "Exceptions create loopholes," she said. "Loopholes create abuse." "Accommodations are not loopholes," I said, but she had already moving toward the next car, the next notice. The clipboard flashed, and the pen made that small, assertive sound that meant something permanent had been declared. Mrs. Chen came slowly up the row, walking like a person who didn't want to hurry her grief. She had a paper plate covered with foil in one hand and her keys in the other. When she reached the van, she stood very still. The yellow slip glowed on the windshield. She set the plate on the hood and reached for the paper, hesitated, then pinched the corner like it might be hot. I walked to her side. I saw when she put it there. I said, "May I take a photo for my notes?" She nodded without looking at me. I snapped the picture and waited. The choir launched into a faster number something with hand claps, and the kids by the fence hopped from square to square, counting out loud. "Unauthorized oversized vehicle," she read softly. Unauthorized. Her mouth shaped the word again without sound. She folded the slip once, then twice, then tucked it back under the wiper as if in protest, as if it belonged to the car more than to her. "Do you want me to help you speak to the board?" I asked. She patted my arm, and for a moment I thought she might cry. "Let us eat first," she said. "Then I will decide how to be brave." Back at the tables, Sarah passed her the plate we'd fixed. Mrs. Chen thanked her, then thanked her again, and in that repetition I heard the weight of the week. She sat with the choir ladies and smoothed her napkin and took small bites, keeping her eye on the van the way you watch an old friend in a crowded place. I kept writing down times. Karen shifted her patrol to the outer row, where the lights didn't quite reach, and I followed at a distance. The choir wrapped up the last cord hanging like a ribbon over the lot. People began to stack plates and collect serving spoons. The teenage artists abandoned the chalk to help their parents pack chairs. For a few minutes, the lot felt stripped of sound. Only the floodlight buzzed, and the moths kept orbit. When Karen finished the last row, she stood on the curb and surveyed all she had accomplished. The envelope was thinner now, the clipboard lighter. She nodded to herself, a manager pleased with the ledger of the day, and headed toward her SUV. I put my phone away and breathed out for what felt like the first time all evening. The desert breeze had picked up, bringing the smell of mesquite from somewhere beyond the fence. A dog barked twice, and a baby laughed. I found Sarah and took the empty plate from her hands and told her I would load it in the trunk. I didn't make it that far. Mrs. Chen was waiting by my bumper. She looked smaller under the floodlight, the shadow of the van stretching behind her like a long, quiet road. She glanced once over her shoulder to where Karen's taillights waited to blink alive, then leaned in close so only I could hear. She told me, "My husband's memorial van doesn't belong here." By the pool fence, I overheard whispers that carried more fear than gossip. The chain links vibrated with every thump of cannonballs from the deep end, but the voices stayed low, traveling along the metal like a secret. Chlorine hung thick in the evening air, sharp as pennies on the tongue. A pickup idled in the lot with its windows down, and some oldies station drifted in and out. Sam Cooke 1 second, static the next, like someone flicking between present day and the way things used to be. I had come to the community pool because Sarah said the water loosened the ache in her fingers, and I believed her. But I also needed to see people in daylight, not just under that humming floodlight in the parking lot. David Santos waved when he spotted me. his son dangling from his forearm like a koala, his daughter dragging a mesh bag of foam noodles that left a wet, squeaking trail behind her. Two retirees in terry-cloth robes shuffled by in rubber sandals, towels draped like capes, talking about bingo on Thursday and who owed whom a slice of coconut cake. Marcus David said, lowering his voice as the kids sprinted toward the splash zone. "Can you look at something?" We moved to the shade along the fence where the gravel met a row of agaves. He pulled a folded paper from his swim bag, smoothed it against the chain link, and held it with his thumb so the breeze wouldn't snatch it. "Yellow notice. Unsightly decoration. Sidewalk. Chalk," it read. The font was officious, the tone unmistakable. There was a low-res photo attached to 2 hopscotch squares and a lopsided sun with 8 rays 1 ray, extra long, because a little hand had run out of space. She cited them for chalk, he said. She took pictures from the street then. Then she came closer. Maria was at work. I was in the backyard fixing the gate. When I came around front, Karen was bending over the driveway like a surveyor. She said, "Unsightly decoration is a gateway offense." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Behind us, a lifeguard blew 2 chirps on his whistle and pointed at a kid who'd tried to run along the slick tiles. The kid slowed, slid, laughed anyway. On the far side of the pool, Mrs. Chen sat on a bench with a towel over her lap, fingers worrying the edge until the terry fibers came loose like small clouds. "Gateway to what I asked." "To more," he said. "She told me once people start drawing, they start leaving things out: toys, planters, junk. Then property values slide." That's the phrase. I lifted the notice so the light hit it even. When, yesterday, David said, "She dated it Monday but handed it to me Tuesday. I've got the ring footage of when she approached the door. She never knocked, just slid it between the storm door and the jamb and stood there taking pictures of the driveway." "Send me the footage," I said, "and scans of this. Keep the original someplace dry. No coffee stains. Chain of custody matters even for little things." David smiled without humor. "Only little thing here is the chalk." He glanced toward the shallow end. His daughter was laying a foam noodle across 2 kickboards, making a bridge for a mermaid doll. "We washed it away," he said, quiet now, like it was a bad word. On the bench, Mrs. Chen lifted her hand in a small hello. I walked to her and she patted the space beside her towel like she'd been saving it. Up close, I could see that she was trembling, the kind of fine tremor that telegraphed through bones when a person was burning energy to stay composed. "I brought the photos," she said, "from my backyard. I printed them at the pharmacy because I don't like looking at them on my phone." She opened an envelope with careful fingers and passed me a stack. The first was her memorial garden flat, river stones around a pinwheel, a low bench, a ceramic rabbit whose glaze had cracked in the sun. The second was a close shot of her downspout where it met the gravel, the kind of picture a city inspector might take for a drainage complaint. The third made the inside of my cheek taste like aluminum. It was Karen's hand on Mrs. Chen's side gate latch. The gate showed a hairline gap just enough to slip fingers through. "She came in," I said, keeping my voice level so I didn't send shockwaves through Mrs. Chen's composure. "She said emergency garden drainage," Mrs. Chen replied. "She said water could erode and stones might redirect flow." She took pictures of my bench. "My husband sat there to listen to birds. He used to whistle back." She took pictures of his bench and wrote, "Unapproved landscaping." Mrs. Chen inhaled through her nose, then exhaled carefully. She knew I would be at lap swim. She came then. I glanced along the fence line. The desert evening was putting on a show, one cloud like a fish scale, another like a long feather, and the heat had turned soft instead of hard. But the air around us felt rigid, as if a pane of glass had been stood up between neighbor and neighbor. On the pickup radio, Sam Cooke returned for an entire verse, warm and familiar, then dissolved into static when someone leaned against the fender. I turned the photo slightly. "Who took this? My neighbor across?" she said. He heard my gate. He looked up from the game on his porch TV and saw her slip in. He took 2 pictures. I asked his permission to print them. She tapped the envelope with her knuckle. He said Karen told him once that garden decor attracts pests, so he keeps his wind chimes in a drawer now. The lifeguard chirped 3 short blasts, the universal sound for fun's over for a minute. In the lull, I heard another current of talk running along the pool deck, retirees wrapped in towels, heads angled toward each other, a closed circuit. The words were fragments, but a pattern formed: notice violation, complaint, fine. It was less about what anyone had actually done and more about how many papers could be created with one pen. "May I asked, and when Mrs. Chen nodded, I took a photo of the photo with my phone framing the latch, the hand the sliver of gate shadow on decomposed granite. Evidence didn't have to be dramatic, it had to be clear. "You think we can stop her?" Mrs. Chen said. "I think we can show what's actually happening," I said. "That's the first step." David joined us, wet footprints making quarter moons on the concrete. He held his phone up thumb, moving through clips. "I sent the ring to your number," he said. "Watch how she stands there counting seconds before she slides the notice. It's like she wants the camera to see her obeying some pretend rule about contact." I watched the 30-second clip. Karen, framed in the fisheye posture, neat as a ruler, a yellow paper held with 2 fingers. She didn't knock. She didn't even glance toward the windows. She fed the notice into the door like a bill into a machine, and left. I saved the file to a folder named SV Evidence LAR902 and mirrored it to cloud storage. The open swim horn sounded, and everything went messy for a while, teenagers cannonballing toddlers shrieking the good shrieks, a father's laugh that turned into a cough. I leaned on the fence and counted seconds between whistles and wondered when I'd started counting things for a living. In the service numbers were survival time on target minutes to extract. In civilian life, you'd think you could let the numbers go, but sometimes the only way to fight nonsense is with sequence the kind that stacks itself like bricks. When the pool calmed, an older man in a straw hat sidled up with the careful gait of someone who had new knees and didn't trust them yet. "You're the fellow who asked questions at the town hall," he said, eyes on the water like he was commenting on lane speed. "Tom's a decent sort. He made a face when she talked about equipment expenses." "Equipment," I said. "Cameras," he said. She said, "monitoring aids." I said, "For what?" She said, "Compliance." The word settled heavy and dull. I wrote it in my notes. I'd learned long ago that certain words gave the game away optics gateway compliance. Tools, all of them, but pointed in a single direction. He tugged the towel tighter around his shoulders. "My wife's got a porch swing." He said, "We don't sit there much midday, but in the evenings we do." Last night she swore she heard a click like a camera when she got up to bring the iced tea inside. "Must have been the chain shifting," I told her. Maybe I lied. He wandered off to the shallow end, and I returned to Mrs. Chen. She had composed herself again, the trembling now contained in the tissue she twisted small between her fingers. "If I complain," she said, "they say I'm not supportive of rules. If I am quiet, they say no one objected. I do not like those 2 doors." "There's a 3rd door," I said. "You walk through with company." She smiled at that, the first smile of the evening that had nothing to do with politeness. "Company," she repeated as if trying out the key in the lock. We didn't plan anything grand right there, not with the lifeguard flipping the adult swim sign and 2 kids practicing floating like starfish in the lane lines. But neighbors kept drifting closer, not in a huddle that would spook anyone, just a slow tide. They came to ask about Sarah, to trade recipes for pot roast, to mention that the floodlight by the east corner had changed angle and now shone into a bedroom. They asked if I'd heard the rumor of a new patrol schedule, if I'd seen the email about a cleaner aesthetic. They used little words that were really big words. I started connecting dots. The notice on Monday. The yellow slips on Friday. The chalk citation on a day that didn't match the date. The gate latch photo. The mention of cameras without a vote on equipment. A shape was emerging behind the everyday. Around sunset, the pickup station found a clear signal and stayed there a run of songs that pulled memory like taffy from anyone old enough to have driven a car with a bench seat. I closed my eyes for a second and saw my father's hand drumming the steering wheel at a stoplight, heat shimmering over a field the way the world had looked simpler from the passenger side. When I opened them, a man I recognized from the far end of our street was standing beside me, his face composed in that careful neighborhood-neutral way. He lifted his phone. "Thought you'd want this," he said. "My ring, caught it last night. Side gate, the one next to Mrs. Chen's downspout." He tapped to expand the image. Karen, shoulder to the camera, glancing once toward the street, slipping through the side gate at night, her hair catching a slice of porch light just before the latch clicked behind her. I took the phone, framed the screen with my own, and clicked. "Thank you," I said. "Please share the original to my email. Don't post it anywhere yet? I'm not much of a poster," he said. "I'm a sleeper with the TV on." And even I woke up when that latch clicked. He hesitated, then added, "My mother used to say, power is as good as what it protects." I guess I remembered that just now. The pool lights winked on. The lifeguard turned his stool so he could see both the deep end and the gate beyond the snack machine alcove. A moth battered itself silly against the light dome over his head and fell, then tried again. The retirees began to gather their towels, patting shoulder blades and elbows as if they were thanking their bones for another evening of service. I circled the deck, giving myself a minute to think without anyone staring at me like I might fix everything between now and dawn. I passed the snack machine that ate quarters and the bulletin board with its curled flyers for piano lessons and a lost cat named Muffin. I passed the gate to the side alley, the latch at the same height as in the photo the gravel scuffed where someone had turned in a hurry. I don't know why I looked toward the little alcove with the payphone. It hadn't worked in years, not for calls, but the glass still stood like a cabinet, and the handset dangled by its cord like a relic. The alcove had become a kind of semi-private corner. Teens texted there. Older folks peered in to fix their hair in the reflection. Tonight, a voice came from that corner, low and too careful. I drifted closer, let the hum of the pool pump cover my steps, and saw a silhouette angled away from the deck lights, head bowed like in prayer. The hand cupped the phone that wasn't connected to anything, but the other hand cupped a cell, and the whispering threaded the two like wires. Later, I saw her by the pool phone booth whispering about a parking enforcement budget. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Karen clicked her laser pointer like a general marshalling troops. The beam jittered against the white screen, briefly circling the words "Expanded Parking Enforcement Program" as though she were carving them into stone. I shifted in the folding chair, the metal frame squeaking under me, and felt the familiar prickle of anticipation that came from knowing a performance was about to unravel. Around me, retirees shifted restlessly, the kind of small, involuntary movements that said they'd rather be in their recliners with a crossword and a half-watched sitcom. The air smelled of stale coffee burnt at the bottom of the urn, and the box of day-old donuts already sagged in the middle where the glaze had melted into cardboard. Sarah sat near the back, wrapped in her shawl, her eyes half-lidded but attentive. She had insisted on coming, even if fatigue clung to her shoulders like a lead vest. Karen straightened at the podium, clicking the laser pointer once, twice a rhythm to punctuate her words. "We are here to safeguard Simmons Valley," she said, voice carrying as if she had been waiting all day for this exact audience. "Parking is not just about vehicles. It is about aesthetics, order, and yes, property values." She clicked again. A new slide appeared. Projected budget, equipment purchases. The numbers were neatly arranged, bold enough to reach even the last row. But what struck me wasn't the size of the figures, it was the emptiness beside them. No vendor, no breakdown, just a line item with more digits than any of us had ever approved. I leaned forward. Tom Reeves, the treasurer, sat 2 seats from Karen, his pen tapping a nervous rhythm against his ledger. His forehead glistened under the fluorescent glare, and though he wore the expression of someone trying to appear neutral, his body betrayed him, the shoulders tight, the jaw clenched. Karen's voice rose. "We must invest in the proper monitoring tools to ensure compliance. Without them, our rules have no teeth." "Excuse me." My hand went up before she could continue. My voice, calm but firm, cut into the rhythm of her presentation. Heads turned. A few neighbors perked up, grateful perhaps for a crack in the monotony. "What law," I asked evenly, "gives you the authority to ban ADA parking without considering federal accommodation requirements?" The room shifted, a low murmur rippling across the rows. One of the veterans in the front leaned back, folding his arms. Sarah sat straighter, her eyes narrowing just a fraction as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Karen's smile froze, then reformed like plaster filling a crack. "Property value protection," she said smoothly. "We must consider the greater good. Exceptions undermine consistency." "Consistency doesn't override federal law," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "Reasonable accommodation isn't optional." The retirees muttered louder now, the scrape of folding chairs against linoleum mixing with the smell of scorched coffee. One woman flipped through the bylaws packet with shaking hands as though the answer might leap off the page if she looked quickly enough. Karen clicked the pointer again, flashing another budget slide onto the screen. "Let's stay focused," she said. Her voice sharpened now. "These equipment purchases are vital for monitoring compliance. Cameras, signage, patrol coordination." Tom cleared his throat, the sound cutting through her words like a loose string snapping. His pen tapped faster. "Karen." He began, his voice wavering just enough to draw attention. "We don't have a vendor listed here. We don't have quotes. We don't—" He stopped himself. Eyes flicking toward me. Karen snapped her pointer off and placed it on the table with deliberate force. "The details are in process. This board must have faith in its leadership." I stood. "Then, as a resident, I'm requesting the official minutes of this meeting and the supporting financial documentation for this proposed expenditure, as per our bylaws." The air thickened. Every shuffle of paper, every sip of bitter coffee, Every creak of folding chairs became amplified. Tom's pen stilled, and he looked at me with something like relief flickering behind his eyes. Motion to approve. Karen pressed, trying to ride momentum. All in favor. But Tom spoke again, louder now, stumbling over his words but unwilling to stop. I think we should table this vote until we've reviewed vendor details." His voice cracked, but the words hung heavy, a weight in the room no one could ignore. Silence gripped the hall. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to falter. Karen's smile collapsed into a thin line. The retirees stared at the front, unsure whether to clap whisper or keep perfectly still. The meeting adjourned soon after, papers rustling like dry leaves, residents filing out with murmurs that carried both relief and unease. I gathered my notes, slid the donut box aside to clear the table, and caught sight of Sarah giving me a small nod from the back row. As the crowd thinned, Tom brushed past me near the doorway. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the scrape of chairs and the squeak of shoes on linoleum. "We need to talk. Privately." It wasn't the first time I'd leaned across a diner booth with secrets, but this time the ledger smelled of coffee and risk. The jukebox in the corner hummed a tune that had lived in the bones of this place longer than the chrome trim, something with a walking bass and the promise of summer nights. Neon buzzed in the window like a dragonfly caught in a jar, and Ruth poured coffee with the gravity of a minister calling everyone Han, as if the word could stitch a town together. Tom Reeves slid into the booth opposite me, hair combed, flat tie askew, like he'd tried twice to straighten it and given up. He kept the manila folder pressed to his ribs while he breathed as if his own heartbeat might scatter what was inside. When he finally put it on the formica, he didn't let go right away. He sat with his palms still resting on the cardboard eyes on mine, waiting for permission to move forward and praying I'd grant absolution he hadn't asked for. Ruth came by and set down 2 mugs and a little clatter without apology. "You boys look like you need top-offs already," she said, pouring anyway. The coffee smelled burnt the way diner coffee is supposed to smell after sundown. She set a small pitcher of half and half between us and leaned her elbow on the back of the booth like she owned the whole building. "Kitchen's got a fresh peach pie. Don't make me beg. Bring 2 plates, I said. And Ruth, thank you. Always," she said, already moving pen tucked behind her ear. Tom's fingers trembled when he opened the folder. He had labeled the inside with sticky note dates in tidy numbers. A thin ledger book lay on top, its edge stained dark where a splash of coffee had dried into an accusation. He flipped to an invoice stamped Residential Compliance Solutions, and my breath paused at the P.O. box. I knew the number. Everyone who'd ever mailed a dues check did. It was the same post office box printed at the bottom of Karen's HOA emails. I kept my voice low. "You know what this is." "I know," he said, swallowing. I knew the minute she said there wasn't time for competitive bids, that we needed speed over paperwork to keep up appearances. She said if I hesitated, people would assume I had something to hide. He gave a soft laugh that failed to be a laugh. Turns out I did. 20 years back, I filed a return late when my mother got sick. Paid the penalty. Public record. His eyes went to the window, where neon painted us both in a tired red. She found it. Told me if I kept slowing her down, she'd remind people of my history with compliance. I touched the edge of the ledger. "That's fraud, Tom. You know it." "I know it in my bones," he said. "Which is why those bones haven't slept." "Marcus, I'm an accountant. I was raised to think numbers were a kind of honesty. But this," he tapped the invoice where the P.O. box lived like a cockroach that refused to die. "This is numbers in costume." Ruth slid the pie plates in with the skill of a blackjack dealer, then topped off our mugs even though we hadn't asked. "Kitchen says best peaches of the season," she said, but her eyes had strayed to the words on the page. Not the numbers, Ruth didn't care about digits, but the phrase, Compliance Solutions. She rolled it in her mouth like a wine she didn't trust. "Funny name," she said, "for a company nobody's seen delivering anything. Then to soften it, holler if y'all need ice cream." We waited until her steps faded past the jukebox. The tune changed to something brighter. Outside, a sheriff's cruiser rolled slow down Main, the deputy glancing in the window out of habit. He recognized Tom, gave a nod that said he knew this booth and its regulars and the way the town held itself upright by ritual. He kept going, no lights, no questions. Tom turned another page. There were 3 invoices each within a month, all in round numbers that made auditors flinch. No sales tax line, no shipping, no vendor contact. The ledger entry for each said simply, Monitoring Aids, written in Karen's tidy hand, metric neatness used like a club. She told the board Tom said that cameras were needed for deterrence, but there was never a motion to approve cameras. No vote to purchase equipment. No vendor presentation. Just this. He motioned at the folder, and the paper breathed with the movement like some small live thing. "Do you have copies of the monthly minutes?" I asked. He nodded. "I made them for you." He slid a stapled packet forward. "You'll see how she phrases things. The board discussed the need for improved parking oversight. Not approved. Not purchased. Just discussed. If you don't read carefully, your brain fills in the next step." I scanned the pages, my finger keeping place the way it used to keep place on a map when a helicopter shuddered just enough to throw a man's eyes off his task. The trick was not to let the motion interrupt the line you were drawing through the world. "We need the bank statements," I said, "and a clean scan of these invoices, high res, front and back. We'll preserve the originals." Tom angled the folder so the neon wouldn't glare on the page while I took photos. She told me once, he said slowly, that people don't remember small votes, just big outcomes. It sounded clever at the time. Now it sounds like a confession. Ruth drifted back with more coffee she pretended we had requested. "Choir ladies were in here for lunch," she murmured, rearranging our napkins as if tidying a mess that wasn't on the table. "Said the board talked about equipment, without saying what. I told them if I ran supplies through a P.O. box with my own name on it, Dot would have fired me twice." She smoothed a crease in the sugar caddy. "You boys want whipped cream. Kitchen's feeling generous." "Maybe later," I said, and she winked, but she didn't go far. The word compliance had tuned her attention the way thunder tunes a hound's ears. Tom's shoulders lowered a fraction as I photographed each page. "I signed 2 of these under pressure," he said. She stacked the agenda, saved the budget talk for when people had started standing up to leave. Then she slid them across the table to me like they were routine. I told myself I was keeping the peace. "You were avoiding humiliation," I said. "Bullies count on that." I set my phone down and let the image of the P.O. box sit between us like a third cup. "Here's what we do. We duplicate scans and photos, then route the evidence to people who can't ignore it. Not neighbors, not gossip, the right offices, and we copy you on everything. Transparency protects you." Tom stared at the ledger as if it might bite. "She'll come after me." "She already has," I said. "The only difference now is you won't be standing there alone." He met my eyes and held them, and I watched the guilt wash one way, the resolve another. He opened his wallet and pulled out a small photo of himself and his late brother at a county fair. Both of them grinning above paper plates piled with ribs. He used to say, "Do the next honest thing." Not the big honest thing. The next one. He tucked the photo back and exhaled like a tire sighing back onto the road. "Okay. The next honest thing is, I give you everything I have." We worked like that for an hour, Ruth replenishing our coffee without interrupting the flow of words, the jukebox spinning a dozen songs the town had memorized neon, painting the pie plates with the same red it gave to last year and the year before. Tom wrote out a timeline while I labeled a folder on my phone, SV Financials Yaoja 908. We built a simple chain of custody photo scan, duplicate backup, offsite. I texted myself the checksum values. It was boring, and it was beautiful. Ruth came back with the check and a look that had less curiosity and more concern. "This compliance company," she began, then stopped, tasting the phrase again. "Who do they comply to?" Apparently Tom said, voice dry as the napkins Karen. Ruth nodded as if she'd suspected as much since the Hoover administration. "Choir ladies meet at the picnic tables behind the fellowship hall next Monday," she said. "They like to sing the truth, not just hymns." She scribbled something on the back of a placemat and slid it to me. "Ruth Sell. You call me if you need to know who heard what when. I pour coffee for half this town. The rest come for pie." The sheriff's cruiser rolled by again, slower this time, the deputy's gaze passing over us like a street lamp passing over a window. He lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in a gesture that belonged to an older America where roads were fewer and names were more certain. Tom answered with a nod the kind men have used for generations to say, "I'm a citizen, not a case." The cruiser kept going. "Marcus," Tom said when the plates were scraped to crumbs and the ledger snug again in its envelope, "I've been ashamed for 8 months. Every time I said nothing, it got heavier. Tonight feels like someone opened a window." He moved his hand toward mine, then pulled back, then moved it again. "I don't want to be brave alone." "You won't be," I said. "I'll take this further. You won't stand alone. We left cash for Ruth and more than enough tip, the kind you leave when someone has ferried you across a small river." The neon buzzed hello and goodbye in the same tone. When we reached the door, the night air felt honest in a way the paperwork hadn't for a while. Ruth met us under the bell that never rang at the right time. She lowered her voice to a conspirator's whisper, one hand on the check presenter like it was an altar rail. As we left, Ruth whispered, "Folks are going to want to hear this at the choir picnic." The envelope in my mailbox was stiff official and heavy with threat. It lay there like a brick in a bread box, green return receipt card stapled to the corner, my name, block printed in a tidy HOA hand I'd seen on too many memos. The morning light was sharp in that way September gets here, the desert giving you clarity but not comfort. Our porch swing creaked once in the breeze, a metronome that never learned any tune, but patience. I carried the envelope to the steps and sat. The wood was warm already. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler rattled to life, coughed, and fell into its rhythm. A neighbor's screen door whispered open and shut. I had the sense of being watched, not out of nosiness, but out of the way small towns brace with one another when they feel weather coming. I ran a thumb under the flap and broke the seal. The letterhead was the HOA's. The tone belonged to something older and colder. Notice of intent to record. Lien, it read with paragraphs that thickened as they went. It referenced a violation not cured, the pending adoption of parking enforcement nuisance conditions, and my personal favorite, aesthetic uniformity. It gave dates, plenty of them, and a hearing window, and a sentence that pretended to be a courtesy, but was really a timer, 10 days to cure after hearing if the board finds against homeowner. Failure to cure may result in lien recorded with the county. At the bottom, the signature sat as straight as a yardstick. Karen's title followed like an echo. I read it twice. Then I read the line that mattered most, the one that said sent via certified mail. Delivery confirmed. The green card had our address and a scribble that tried to look like my name and a timestamp that said the man in the truck had come by at 8:07. The porch swing complained again. Sarah stepped out in her robe, one hand on the doorframe as if the house could give her steadiness. "Is it the mail?" she asked, already knowing. "It's the one I said." She sat beside me. The swing shifted and pinched my thigh the way old things do when they're reminding you they were built to last. I handed her the letter. She read without speaking, lips moving on every fourth word the way she did when she was tired but didn't want to miss a thing. When she finished, she kept her eyes on the page a heartbeat too long, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into mercy. "We could lose the house over a parking spot," she said, and the words landed hard enough to move the air. I put my hand over hers, feeling the tremor she denied when the doctor asked about side effects. They want us to believe that I said. They want the panic to do the work. She shook her head, a small, stubborn motion that made me love her a fraction more for the 1,000th time. "It isn't just panic, Marcus. It's numbers and schedules and signatures. It's being tired enough to say yes because saying no takes more energy than you have." We sat like that, two people on a porch with a letter like a blade laid across their knees. Across the street, Mr. Jenkins appeared with his trash can and then remembered it wasn't pickup day and pretended he had meant to wash the lid. The morning had the hush of a church just before the hymn when everyone inhales the same air and decides to sing or not. A car rolled by slow. Black paint, clean windows, the particular kind of cautious speed you use when you want to see without acknowledging that you're looking. Karen's profile was a coin, the kind minted with a smile that says good citizen until you notice the edge. She didn't wave. I didn't either. She didn't need to see my hand to know it would be steady. Sarah set the letter in her lap and pinched the bridge of her nose. "I don't want to fight you and the cancer and a homeowners association, Marcus." "You won't," I said. "I'm right here. The law is right here." I tapped the envelope. They sent this certified for a reason. They want to look official. Being official isn't the same as being right. Being official can still take your house, she said. The screen door creaked, and then the porch boards announced a visitor with 2 soft notes of a shoe. Mrs. Chen stood there with a glass jar beaded in condensation tea darker than coffee, a bundle of mint leaves clinging to the ice. "Sweet tea," she said. My mother swore it calms ruckus in the blood. She set the jar on the rail and sat on the other end of the swing without asking if she could. Good neighbors do that. They trust their welcome is standing there already. Heard the mail truck, she said, eyes kind but direct. "I thought of you." I passed her the letter. She reached for her glasses and slipped them down her nose, reading like a schoolteacher who plans to assign a fair grade, even if she doesn't like the subject. When she got to the bottom, she exhaled softly and raised the jar. "Sip," she said to Sarah. "Sip first, fight second." Sarah obeyed. The jar was heavy, and the tea tasted like a summer night 15 years ago when her father had told me to take care of his girl, and I had said I would and not known in how many directions I was promising. Mrs. Chen touched my forearm. Her fingers were cool from the glass. You fought bigger battles before she said, with less polite envelopes, "We'll stand with you." The jar passed between us a little sacrament. The swing found a slower rhythm. The boards remembered they were part of a house that had kept a roof over laughter and grief in equal measures. The letter lay between us like a snake we'd rather shoo than kill. "I'll need to put things together," I said. Cleanly, not angry. The kind of file a person can hand to anyone and say, "Read." The kind a judge can understand without squinting. "You already started," Mrs. Chen said. "I saw you Friday with your notes, and at the pool, and at the meeting." She eyed the envelope again. She thinks paper scares people more than truth does. From the street, a delivery truck thumped over the seam in the asphalt. Farther off, a dog barked and then decided to let the world live. The green return card winked in the sun like a piece of cheap jewelry. I stood. "I need the trunk." Sarah's eyes raised. "Marcus." "It's time," I said, not unkindly. Not a fight on their terms, on the law's terms. I went inside and took the key from the dish where we keep the things that want to stray: paper clips, spare coins, and old bottle opener shaped like a trout. The hallway smelled like last night's onions, the sweet kind you only get when you nailed the heat. The house felt aware of us the way houses do when their people are worried and trying not to show it. In the garage, light came in thin through the high windows, dust motes thick enough to make a galaxy. I set the box on the workbench. Not a big box, a file box, the corrugated kind your hands remember from a move. I labeled the tab weeks ago when Karen turned a notice into a campaign SV/parking evidence. Inside, I had a grid of folders I'd made while Sarah slept: bylaws, high-lit. Notices, photos, minutes. Official photos, neighbors, and a blank tab, waiting for whatever else truth required. From the desk drawer, I took 3 things. First, the letter from Sarah's doctor, ADA language in plain English, signed with clinic letterhead and a phone number, real humans answer. It explained her need to park close: no drama, just medicine. Second, a printout of the state statute about veteran license plates and parking accommodations highlighted where it said "shall" instead of "may." The words of law matter more than how they sound in a speech. Third, a copy of the ledger page. Tom and I had scanned the invoice from the so-called compliance company, the P.O. box number I could draw from memory. I slipped each paper into its own clear sleeve because you learn over time that fingerprints rub off the wrong things and stick to the right ones. I added a small spiral notepad I'd been keeping in my back pocket: dates and times, and a shorthand chart that would make sense to no one until it made sense to everyone. Then, a USB stick with video files from David's Ring camera and 2 stills of Karen's hand on the side gate latch. I wrote the checksum in pen on a sticky note and attached it to the drive because a file means more when its numbers can be proved to equal themselves. Finally, I put in a fresh legal pad and an extra pen. Not because I had visions of a courtroom, because any meeting gets better when ink meets paper while people are watching. I closed the lid, carried the box to the car, and set it in the trunk like something fragile in a rough world. The hinges made a sound that I've always liked a little, like a hymn sung through a throat first thing in the morning. Mrs. Chen and Sarah stood in the doorway now, the letter hovering between them like a moth that couldn't find the bulb. I stepped back onto the porch, wiped my hands on my jeans, and looked one more time at the green card stapled to the notice. In a fight like this, certified mail is both a weapon and a shield. Today, it would be her weapon. Tomorrow, it might be my shield. Sarah reached for my hand. "I'm scared," she said, "because courage isn't the opposite of fear. It's the companion that shows up anyway." I know I said, "Me too." Karen's car appeared again at the far end of the block, easing past the stop sign like it had been granted a private interpretation of physics. She didn't slow where our house sat. She didn't need to. She knew the letters had arrived. She knew the rhythm of the porch swing. She knew fear when she counted on it. I walked back to the trunk. The key turned the lid, lowered the latch, caught. It was a small sound in a big morning, but it felt like a line being drawn not on a map, not on a driveway, but through the middle of an idea that had been allowed to get too fat for its clothes. I pressed my palm to the metal like you'd pat a shoulder. If she wants a fight, she'll get one with the law. We ate sandwiches at noon because food puts weight back into bodies that letters try to hollow out. Mrs. Chen left the jar with us and promised a casserole later, no matter what the internet says about carbs. I stacked the dishes, and Sarah went to lie down, and the house exhaled into its afternoon shape. The porch swing settled into a slower creak. I was in the hallway searching the drawer for stamps when a shadow crossed the threshold. A rectangle of paper slid under the door, nudged forward by a shoe with too much polish for a Wednesday. I stood still until the footsteps retreated, then bent and picked it up. The paper was smooth, freshly printed, and it smelled faintly of toner and the kind of air conditioner that lives in closets. The emergency meeting notice slid under my door that same evening. On Labor Day, we gathered where it all began this time with flags, food, and a freedom worth more than parking. The sun was a little gentler that Monday, as if it understood we'd earned some mercy. The lot shimmered not with heat alone, but with movement, rows of folding chairs, coolers tucked beneath tables, and bunting that someone had pulled from an attic and pressed back into service. The faded stars and stripes swayed above us, familiar and unpretentious like the people standing beneath them. Smoke from half a dozen grills curled together into a single plume that carried the scent of ribs and hickory down the length of Simmons Valley Drive. Sarah walked at my side, her steps slow but steady. Her smile the kind of thing you hold on to with both hands. She held my elbow, not because she needed it, but because she wanted to. Every so often she leaned in and whispered the names of dishes as if reciting scripture: coleslaw, potato salad, baked beans. Each word heavier with memory than with mayonnaise. In the center of the lot, Mrs. Chen's van stood like a monument. Its sides were polished, the decals shining the flag decal bright against the desert sky. Neighbors gathered around it not to complain or whisper, but to admire, to nod, to let their hands graze the metal as if they were offering thanks. Children circled it, chalk in their fists, dragging lines across the pavement that grew into suns and stick figures and American flags as crooked as any drawn with love. Tom Reeves cleared his throat near the folding microphone stand. His shirt collar sagged in the heat, but he didn't reach for the tie he'd left behind at home. "Neighbors," he began, voice unsteady but honest. "I owe you apologies more than one. For silence, for hesitation, for forgetting that this board belongs to you, not to one person." He paused. "We will hold elections next month. In the meantime, I'll serve as treasurer under the oversight of 2 volunteers." His eyes flicked to me. "And we will publish every check we write." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, stronger than applause. Transparency sounds like paper, but it feels like air after a storm. Sarah tugged me closer to the van where Mrs. Chen waited with her hands folded over her cane. Parked in the center, she said proudly, "No clipboard could tell me no." She winked at Sarah. He would have liked this. The choir from the Methodist church tuned up by the picnic tables, their harmonies scattering across the lot, soft as the ice rattling in lemonade cups. Neighbors handed plates back and forth without counting portions. People who hadn't spoken in months found themselves swapping stories as naturally as salt and pepper. I stood back for a moment, watching the children fill the asphalt with colors no notice could erase. The same chalk, once used as evidence of disorder, now turned into a banner of belonging. What Karen had marked as violation, the community reclaimed as freedom. It was, in its own small way, malicious compliance rewritten into triumph. The sheriff strolled in just long enough to take a rib, tip his hat, and nod toward the van. He didn't need to stay longer. The point was made. Authority wasn't something you waved from behind a windshield. It was something you carried when the people around you trusted you to use it right. Sarah leaned her head against my shoulder. Her hair smelled faintly of barbecue smoke and the lavender lotion she still ordered from the same catalog her mother had. "We can stay," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was a truth she needed spoken aloud. The crowd nearby applauded, not for me, not even for Sarah, but for Mrs. Chen, who raised her cane in mock salute beside the van. The sound spread, multiplying until it was impossible to know whether they clapped for her for themselves or for the simple act of standing together without fear. I found myself looking at the lot, the tables, the grill smoke curling up to heaven. I thought about Karen, about the clipboard she had wielded like a badge. Power had sat in her hand like ink, but it had never belonged to her. It belonged to the people, the ones who sipped coffee from thermos mugs on benches, who swapped casseroles, who whispered courage at poolside, who leaned across diner booths and risked something for the truth. And it belonged to Sarah, who still smiled even with tired eyes, who stood at my side while the desert tested both of us with heat and silence. Later that afternoon, after the last of the ribs were gone and the choir had sung themselves hoarse after Chalk Suns outnumbered parking lines 2-1, we folded chairs together and stacked paper plates. Children ran barefoot across the same asphalt that once carried violation slips under wiper blades. The lot was no longer theirs, or mine, or Karen's. It was ours, messy and full of laughter. We walked home under strings of lights someone had strung between lampposts, Sarah's arm hooked through mine. Our porch swing creaked hello as we sat, the night air cooler than any September had the right to be. The next morning the house was still. A breeze nudged the curtains and the scent of barbecue smoke lingered like a good memory. I checked the mail as habit demanded. Bills, a postcard, a grocery flyer, and then one more envelope this time, postmarked from Texas. I slid it open at the kitchen table. Inside was a letter, polite and careful, from another homeowners association states away. We've heard of what happened in Simmons Valley. Would you consider sharing your story with us? Later that week, I received a letter from another HOA in Texas asking if I'd share my story. On that warm September afternoon, the neighborhood discovered its own strength beneath the shade of flags and the laughter of children. What once felt like fear and silence had been turned into trust, shared meals, and a promise that rules would serve people, not control them. In the end, it wasn't a single notice or speech that won, but the steady courage of neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. And, like a porch light glowing steady through the desert night, their unity became a reminder: when community holds together, no clipboard can ever outweigh justice.